Okay, so let's dive in. Today we're looking at something that's probably on everyone's mind
Yeah,
as we head into Friday, April 11th, 2025.
right.
How's the Indian stock market going to react to President Trump's decision to hit pause on those new tariffs for 90 days?
And you know what makes this even more interesting?
What's that?
The Indian markets were closed today for
Hmm.
Mahavir Jayanti.
Oh, that's right.
So while we saw the U.S. markets jump on Wednesday night,
Hmm.
after this news came out, you guys are only going to see the impact of that tomorrow when the NIFTY opens.
That is a great point. Yeah, I mean,
Right.
think back to Wednesday, even with the RBI's repo rate cut,
Exactly.
the Indian markets still closed down. Nifty down 0.61%.
Right.
Sensex fell 0.51%.
Yeah.
And there was this sense of an escalating trade war just hanging over everything.
Absolutely.
So that's really the big question, isn't it?
Yeah.
What can we really expect from the Nifty tomorrow?
Right.
So that's our deep dive today. To cut through the noise and really try to understand how this tariff pause might play out. And we're going to do that by taking a look at what the technical charts are saying and what the experts are saying.
Yeah. So I think the immediate expectation, and it's pretty logical after that positive reaction we saw in the U.S. markets, is that we'll see a positive reaction when the NIFTY opens on Friday.
Yeah.
You know, that surge in the States was a direct result of that 90-day tariff timeout. And we often see this kind of ripple effect across borders when it comes to market sentiment.
But here's where it gets really interesting because you start to look at what the analysts are saying, and it's not all just like, thumbs up across the board.
Oh, really?
So like Dupesh Dameja
Yeah.
from Samsung Securities, he points out that even before this tariff news, the Nifty was really struggling to find a direction.
Yeah.
Trading within a pretty tight range, and he's identified that key immediate support area between 22,300 and 22,207. And for tomorrow specifically, he's really honed in on those intraday levels, the high of 22,470 and the low of 22,350 as those levels to really watch.
So he's saying those are going to be the crucial ones.
Yeah, and what's fascinating too is how he interprets the RSI.
Yeah. What is he saying about that?
Well, you can think of the RSI as a way to gauge if a stock or index is overbought or oversold.
Right. Right.
He notes that it showed a little bit of a bounce heading towards 40 on the daily chart,
Okay.
but he's careful to say that overall buying or selling momentum still feels pretty weak.
Interesting.
So while we might see that initial upward move, that strength might not be there to really make it last.
Hmm.
And for those who are hoping for like a real rally, Dameja sees that resistance zone looming between 22,600 and 22,700.
Okay.
He thinks it would take a really clear break above this level to actually signal we're going up from here.
Right.
Otherwise, his view is basically that the current market action is neutral. Okay. Meaning the next big move is going to depend on which way it breaks out of that current range.
So almost like the market is kind of holding its breath a little bit.
Yeah, and I wonder if, even with this potentially good news from overseas, if there isn't this underlying caution in the Indian market.
Yeah, I could see that.
Maybe investors are just waiting to see if this is just a temporary pause or like a real lasting shift in trade relations.
Makes sense.
Okay, so let's see what Rupak Day from LKP Securities is seeing.
Okay.
He pointed out that on Wednesday, even before we had this tariff announcement from the U.S., the Nifty had already fallen below the upper boundary of what's called a falling channel,
Okay.
and also below the 21-day EM.
Now remind me, what is the EMA again?
So the EMA stands for exponential moving average, and
Yeah.
traders use that to identify short-term trends.
Okay.
And when it falls below that, it can signal a weakening momentum,
Got it.
which in this case means resistance around 22,500.
Hmm.
And he makes this even more potentially bearish by adding in the fact that there's been a bearish crossover in the Nifty RSI.
Now, what does that tell us exactly?
Well, when you see that kind of crossover in the momentum indicator, it can really reinforce this idea that negative momentum is building.
Okay.
So even though we could get that initial positive bump, Dasa anticipates that the weakness will probably continue as long as we're below that 22,500 mark.
Gotcha.
But he does offer this possible bullish scenario.
Okay.
If the Nifty can break above 22,500,
Yeah.
he sees a path towards 22,750 to 22,800.
Okay.
But here's the catch. If it doesn't cross that 22,500 hurdle, he's warning that we could see a drop all the way to 22,000.
Wow, that is a big difference.
It is. So it's almost like this is a real battleground.
Yeah.
Will the optimism from the U.S. be enough to overpower these technical signals that are already pointing to weakness? We'll have to see. Okay, so now let's bring in another perspective this time from Mehra at Samso Securities.
Okay.
He's also flagging the formation of what's called a bearish candlestick pattern on the Nifty's daily chart.
What is that exactly?
So these patterns, they can suggest that sellers are starting to take control at those higher price levels.
So not a good sign.
Not really, no.
Okay.
And he's also looking at the RSI.
Yeah.
And his take aligns with Demage's. He sees it pretty subdued near that 40 level, which, again, suggests a lack of strong buying interest.
Right.
He also brings up a negative crossover in the MECD.
The MECD.
Yeah, you remember the moving average divergence?
Yeah, vaguely.
It's another momentum indicator.
Yeah.
And this one can signal a shift towards a downward trend.
So really he's just adding to that, that pile of caution.
Yeah, and what he really emphasizes is that the Nifty seems to be mirroring this feeling of investors being cautious around the globe.
Oh, so it's not just an Indian market thing.
It seems like a global risk-off sentiment. Yeah, and to really hit that home, he points to that elevated India VIX, which was at 21.43.
Now, the VIX, I know that's like the market's fear gauge, right?
Exactly, and that higher number just means we should expect more volatility in the short term.
So even if we see that jump tomorrow, we could still be in for a bumpy ride.
It's very likely.
Oh, okay.
And to add to that cautious outlook, Mehra notes that the Nifty is currently trading below both its 9-day and 20-day exponential moving averages.
Right.
Which, remember, those give us a sense of the very short-term trends.
Right.
He also points out that we're seeing a continuation of a lower high, lower low pattern, which technically weakens the short-term trend even further.
Wow.
So he's identified that support zone between 22,150 and 22,000.
Okay.
And like that Demege, he also sees that pretty strong resistance around 22,700 if we want to see any real upward movement.
So all these first three experts are saying the same thing.
Pretty much, yeah.
That there are these underlying signs of weakness and some pretty serious resistance levels that the Nifty has to break through.
Even with this potential lift from the U.S.
Right.
Okay, so lastly, let's take a quick look at what Devarsh Vakil at HDFC Securities is saying.
Okay.
He gives us a really concise view here, just pointing to that immediate support for the Nifty at 22,270 for the short term.
Go.
And his opinion on the resistance zone pretty much aligns with the others, right? In that 22,700 to 22,800 range.
So again, that same idea that breaking through that area is crucial for any kind of momentum going forward.
Exactly.
Wow. Okay, so bringing it all together for our listeners.
Yeah, so it seems pretty likely that we'll see a positive reaction in the Indian market tomorrow.
Right when it opens.
Yeah, to Trump's tariff pause. And that's mainly because of those gains in the U.S. markets.
Right, and this is key. Those technical indicators for the Nifty itself, they're giving us a mixed picture. There were already some potential bullish signals, but also quite a few bearish ones even before we got this news about the tariffs.
Exactly. And all the experts we've talked about have really highlighted these important levels that we need to watch.
Yeah, what are those again?
So on the downside, keep an eye on that 22,270 to 22,300 support area.
Okay.
And then on the upside, that 22,500 to 22,800 zone seems like a major hurdle.
Okay, so a lot of levels to keep track of.
Yeah, and like Mehra was saying, that volatility is likely to stay high.
Right.
This 90-day pause, it's good news for now.
Yeah.
But it doesn't really resolve the fundamental trade tensions.
True.
So whether or not we see any real upward movement that lasts is going to depend on the Nifty's ability to break through those resistance levels.
And if it struggles,
yeah,
those bearish signals could easily take over again.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So to wrap this all up, while this pause on the tariffs is a potential boost for the Indian stock market when it opens tomorrow,
right,
the Nifty's future is still uncertain.
Absolutely.
It all comes down to how it interacts with these support and resistance levels that our experts have been talking about.
And the technical indicators, they're telling us to be cautious.
Right.
And that high volatility means we could see some pretty big price swings.
It's going to be interesting to watch.
It really is.
So there you have it, listeners. You've got a much clearer picture now of what's likely to impact the market's behavior tomorrow.
That's right.
So really pay close attention to how the Nifty is trading around those support and resistance zones.
Yeah.
That's going to give you the best signals for what might happen next.
Absolutely. And to leave you with one final thought.
Yeah.
Think about how quickly these global events can really change the mood in the market.
Oh, yeah.
We have this 90-day tariff pause. It's a bit of relief.
Yeah.
But it raises the question, what are the bigger forces at play that will really decide what happens to the Indian stock market in the long run?
That is a good question.
Does this pause mean things are really changing in global trade? Or is this just the calm before a storm?
It's definitely something to keep in mind as we watch how things play out.
Exactly.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the Indian stock market.
See you next time.
We'll be back soon with more insights.
Bye.